five people that helped this morning with the presentation.
What is climate crisis? So we, like in our day-to-day life, we are feeling so many changes surrounding us, right? So and like the season change and climate crisis is basically change of climate. Unacceptably, sometimes when there's a season like when it's not winter, you feel winter like climate surrounding you, and it's our planet and people are at risk by this climate crisis. So, and we'll see nature cycle, right? So, it's climate crisis is created by the few of the gases, the gases in our environment which cannot support our living. So the unnatural cycle, right? So you can see fossils fossils can be used, it's been used in our home, and plus we are using heating and all that, facilities, but we do not know how that affects our environment, right? So for that we cut plants, right, to do fire, in our fireplace, right? So for heating, surviving. So some carbon stored as coal and oil also, and some carbon returned from decays, right? So, and we will, if we won't take any action, it will be hard to restore the living on this earth. So.
All right, let's get into the science of it. So I wanted to just quickly start by talking about the greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect is basically highlighting the fact that until recently our planet has been covered in a blanket of atmosphere that provides for sustainable living conditions. That means it stays optimally warm or optimally cold as needed. And this atmosphere is a balance of how much heat or light as it comes in is converted into heat and stays here within the atmosphere, and how much is reflected externally. So atmosphere contains things like carbon dioxide, water vapors, monoxide, nitrogen, and other gases. And that's basically how the greenhouse effect keeps us, or has kept us where it is. However, unfortunately, things are changing. With the rising use of fossil fuels over the last several decades, the balance has been thrown off. So that means higher presence of gases like methane and carbon dioxide in our atmosphere are now starting to impact the climate, which means the temperatures within the atmosphere are starting to go up. And that can translate into some significant impact in terms of melting ice snow caps, as well, which translates into more water, rising tides, or rising sea levels. So all of these are some of the impacts that the team is going to cover as we get deeper into the crisis at hand and what we are dealing with. But let's quickly look at how this can manifest. What are the impacts of it? So here's an example of the Arctic ice and the Greenland ice. So this is on the northern part of the planet. So as of 1980, this is what the Arctic and Greenland ice looked like. So you can see a wide mass area covered with ice and snow, and what it acted as was something called a reflector. So it will, as sun rays hit the earth, some of them will be absorbed, again, to sustain a healthy atmosphere, and some of them will be reflected so that it does not get too hot. So up until 1980, this is what it looked like, and that meant, again, a more healthy atmosphere. However, things have started to degrade. Again, from 1980, which is where we were, transitioning to 2012, which was about 10 years ago, you can see the degradation and decline in the the ice and the snow caps on the north side of the planet. So the lost area is almost equivalent to the area of the United States, the continental United States. So what that means is, again, melted snow caps, melted ice, rising sea levels and ocean levels, thinner ice hair, higher climate, all of this kind of, again, manifesting itself in more extreme climates, more extreme temperatures that we're already starting to experience. So this is just a high-level example of how things are already starting to be impacted just in the last 30 to 40 years that this signifies. Again, the next slide just speaks back to that idea of reflective nature of what the purpose the snow caps and the ice caps serve, and how we're going to lose on that along with the overall rise in sea level. So that's where we're headed, but again, the team will highlight some more.
Yeah, so this is a graph that shows two different things. It shows the global temperature as it's rising and the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as that is also rising. And it shows the direct correlation between the two. And at this point in time, we are higher than we have ever been in human history, or in the planet's history, pretty much. So this is the graph that shows how much of the greenhouse gases we have in the air. It's measured in ppm, or parts per million. Yeah. And so the safe level is around 280 parts per million. The highest safe level is 350, and we are at 410 right now, so we need to get that down. And there are people that when they hear this, they think that it's like not possible, it's not something that we can do easily, but it is possible. Like, there are scientific studies that prove it, as long as we all work together and try and solve it. This slide shows the amount of fossil fuels that are being put into the air by us burning them, and how that's increased dramatically per year since the Industrial Revolution. So that can be things like hydrocarbon gas, petroleum, and coal from us burning them as fossil fuels. And this graph shows three different possibilities of if we act to stop climate change. We've already passed the green one, which was in 2010, and we're about halfway to the pink one. And so, as you can see, it gets exponentially worse the longer we wait. And at this point, if we started immediately, we would be back to normal levels by around 2150. So we need to get our act together and stop it.
So this brings us to the second question. Why is climate change something we must care about? Well, here you can see the Elliott Glacier in Mount Hood. It has changed drastically, as you can see. Here it was covered with snow, and here it is not covered with snow. Not only is it not pretty to look at, we also need the snow, because when it melts, it creates fresh water for us to drink. And without that snow that would melt in the summertime to create fresh water, we could have a problem. The next one is that climate change has also caused some places to be drier than they should be. You see, there used to be a snow park, but as you can see, there is no snow left in sight. Also, there is climate fire. This is Eagle Creek Fire, Columbia River Gorge in 2017. With the rising temperatures, the air also gets hotter, and that makes the trees drier and more likely to catch on fire. Also, the soil becomes more dense and loses all its moisture, and that also can be dry and catch on fire really easily. This one is also a neighborhood in California, and in only a matter of days, it's been transformed into something really devastating. Though this also shows that the soil here was dense, so it had no water to stop it. As you can see, that's only one day.
extreme amounts of sea level rising due to the heat. Coastal areas like Venice, Italy are flooded underwater and have to deal with this constantly. And as you can see, a comparison between before and after due to the extreme amounts of rise in temperature and flooding.
So, this is climate change, and this is because warm water holds more water than cold water, and this is a flood. So, this is a flood in Netherlands, land in Texas. So, in one storm, it received 5 feet of rain in one storm, and so this effect could be that a lot of rain falling, and the cause is that cars washing away and people dying with people drowning.
Companies and governments are making decisions that are poisoning our drinking water. The gases we use to bake and use in our everyday lives come from underground, and it's safe to keep those gases underground, but to inject those gases from underground, chemicals and poisons are injected into the ground, and that affects our drinking water and poisons it, eventually causing us to not have enough drinking water to protect us in droughts and fires.
So this quote truly represents the situation poor countries are in. It says, the gravest effects of all attacks on the environment are suffered by the poorest, and you can clearly see it in this slide here. Poor countries don't have enough money to rebuild their houses and reconstruct old ones, so they just kind of have to live with the environmental changes, and it's pretty sad.
This is a map of North America, and it shows the sea level, the rise of the sea level, and it I pretty much, but the light blue piece there, that's like the ice cover, and yeah. And this is kind of a hard section to understand because it's sunny, but it's also flooding in Miami because of the rising of the ocean rising.
So this is Republic Marshall, where Palm Dollars was born. This is one of the cities. It is impacted by flood, and all of the cities like this. There's a lot of cities are in the ocean, in the ocean, and it is impacted by flood, and they're and the people they live there, they need to leave their houses and cities and go and find another cities more safe for them. And there is a study that is roughly a third to half of the global population live near of the coast. So imagine how many people they are will be suffering from flood, and not the people living in these cities. Also, the people they are trying to feed them and to help them also. There's a lot million of people they are impacted from the flood. Like what we see here in the board, there is refugees. They are leaving their countries and traveling to Europe by the boat, and take this dangerous because the climate changes. Yeah, there is a lot of countries and cities and people they are living. It is impacted by the flood, and there is a lot of people they are now they call climate refugees.
This leads us to the big question: how can we help? Well, we can help by empowering ourselves and others. We should reduce the greenhouse gas emissions like the emergency it is. We should draw down and naturally store the CO2 that is already in the atmosphere without using the factor of serious We must call upon ancient wisdom traditions that recognize the importance of balance with nature. And a good quote to remember is that individual actions matter, but collective action is what we need the most.
Today you have joined YAE. So you're gonna help protect Earth and learn about climate change.
This is not my slide.
Ocean, we need you back. 34. Yeah. Oops. Okay, sorry. Can you do this one too? Those are Christina. Isn't here.
These are all great people who cleared the path for you to fight upon the climate crisis. Let's talk about some of these people. Julia Olson is a mom and attorney who fights against the climate crisis with her law skills. Wangari Maathai founded a project in Kenya that is also used all over the world, where the goal is to create or plant 1 trillion trees. Greta Thunberg was a 15-year-old activist who stood up for change and talked to her legislators because she felt like there was a problem in the world. Bill McKibben is probably the most important regarding the climate crisis in the United States, as he was the first person to talk and really bring up the fact that climate change was a problem. And with him standing there is Miko and Isaac Burgoon, who are fellow YAE leaders.
After today, you guys will be official YAE climate leaders. For example, Pam organized this gathering to teach us about climate change and other issues having to do with our Earth. The technology for CO2-free future already exists. We must reduce our CO2 emissions to worldwide. Fossil fuels are very dangerous. There are a bunch of carbon dioxide released into the air, and the longer we wait, the worse climate change will get. So the sooner, the better. Help others act. There are many ways to help with decreasing the hazard of increasing climate change. One way is if you're watching a video and stop watching it, pause it maybe. That way other people can follow your lead and try their best to solve the problem. Other ways is instead of using plastic, always using disposable cups, utensils, straws, and things like that. Lots of cows are being fed soy and antibiotics and corn, which is really bad for them. And the reason they're doing it is it helps them earn more money. Helping out. You're helping out by try looking for cows that are being fed grass and yeah.
Trees take carbon dioxide and release oxygen, and and that helps the earth and humans because humans can't survive without oxygen. And humans build houses and like buildings, and that includes wood. So we should plant trees.
Just like we have to pay for our trash to get out, the industries have to pay too. The money can be returned into dividends for everyone, and especially for the ones who need it the most.
Waste not, want not. This is a very big problem in the United States because it's about food waste. And when you waste food, there's obviously other people who need it, and waste of food is also waste of money. And waste of food also leads to waste of energy because food gets transported from other places, and it's like a big loss overall. So wasting food plays a big role in global warming. And go organic and local. So flying and getting stuff from the local store, local farm is very useful because there's not much transportation going on, so not much energy waste, and also growing your own food and food in general. Growing your own food is very useful to the environment.
So a couple more ways that we can make sure to do our own part to reduce the problems with the climate crisis is to make things fair and equitable. One way for those of us who are living in places where we're not indigenous to this land is to learn from the wisdom of the indigenous people who are from here and find out the ways that we can care for the land in ways that are healthy for this particular place. And we can also pay attention to indigenous groups that are asking us to help and make the situation in their indigenous homeland more equitable, so we can listen to them calling out to us to help with saving their waterways or not letting pipelines cross it or other things that indigenous activists are asking the rest of us to help out on. Another way that we can help is to buy things that contribute positively towards caring for the planet instead of harming the planet. And so one way that we can do that is by purchasing things from companies that give back to the earth rather than companies that destroy the earth. So an example on this slide is called invitinglight.com, which has some photos and calendars and stuff like that that you can purchase for your home and that allow you then to pay that company that they pay their profits to nonprofits that support the climate. So those are good ways to invest your funds that you have to care for the earth instead of purchasing things from a corporation that is, creating things somewhere far away, mass producing them, shipping them a long ways, using lots of fossil fuels to get here, and keeping the profits for themselves rather than contributing to care for the earth. Then moving on to some collective actions that we can take. One great possibility of a way that you can get involved is the lawsuit that has been mentioned already that's called Juliana versus the United States. And this is a suite of lawsuits that was started here in Oregon, actually, with our Children's Trust in Eugene. And so they brought together a bunch of youth plaintiffs, about 21 youth plaintiffs from around the country, starting in Oregon, and said, we think that it's the United States' right to us to be able to have a livable future. So we need to be able to stand up for that and say, when you destroy the earth and we don't have a livable future for youth to grow up into, that's not constitutional. So that's a lawsuit that's been going on since 2015. You can join at joinjuliana.org and become a friend of the court so that you can learn about what's going on with that and support it in the ways that they ask. And so there's a movie about it called Youth v. Gov that is now on Netflix, which is really good. Might be something that you might want to watch as a family and be able to learn more about that lawsuit and the things behind it and the youth that are involved. Is pretty inspiring. These are kind of the ideas behind this lawsuit. Is that it's a public trust doctrine saying that the government's holding the land and the water and the air in public trust for future generations. And so to the extent that they're not doing that, they're breaking the law. And so this is based on the Fifth Amendment, that we all have the right to due process for the right to our life, liberty, and property here in the United States. And also the 14th Amendment that gives everyone equal protection under the law, including youth. So youth can't be discriminated against. And so to the extent that the government is discriminating against the future livability for youth right now, they are breaking the Constitution. This lawsuit and the other ones like it would say that the government then needs to make a national climate recovery plan to make up for the harm that they have done. And so this would help us to reduce carbon emissions, store carbon in the ground through some carbon sequestration possibilities, and revitalize the soil so that all of our agriculture is healthier, contributes to the soil health and the ecosystem health rather than degrading the soil. So right now, our government is doing some of this already, even though the lawsuit is being blocked by the government. So the bad part is that the government has been blocking this at every pass as far as the Youth versus Gov lawsuit. So it started in 2015 with the Biden administration, went through the Trump administration, and just this last week the Biden administration said, we're going to continue to block this lawsuit. But we do have people in the federal government, including our own Representative Bonamici, who has been working on a climate action plan that was approved just last June, and so that's being worked on, being implemented in our country, which is good news that we can be glad about for our own representative. And we can be aware that not all laws in our country are just or constitutional. So we can stand up and say, no, we're not going to allow unjust laws to continue. We want those laws to be changed, and we can work through legislative processes to change the laws. We can also stand up and say, we need to follow the just laws that we have and make sure that they're being implemented justly. And so one way to make our voices heard is through demonstrations and actions like you can see here with the Youth v. Gov March. Just last week, a bunch of high schoolers in Portland held a youth climate strike and invited the whole community to participate in that and learn about the climate concerns that are in our area. So you can get involved in things like that.
In order to tell people about climate change and in order to communicate with people about climate change, we obviously need to use our voice so they can know about the dangers and the problems with it and how they can prevent it. So one way would be to give presentations at school, at your workplace, at fundraiser. That way people at that group can learn about it, and then you can spread it to numerous groups based on how many presentations you do and where. We also can talk to the media. Rather than just doing a specific group, we can make an Instagram account, Facebook page, or YouTube channel to reach the hundreds of thousands of people on the internet so that they can know and then they can share the information with other people. We also can't forget to use our voice. If we don't use our voice, people will not know about the dangers of climate change and how to prevent it.
You can talk to your elected leaders, or because they have, they're more influential, and that can make a difference. Show up for marches, rallies, and demonstrate with people, and go to more populated areas for more of an impact. Create like art, visuals, and like posters, shirts, where people can see, and yeah, and bring friends so you can you know, help organizations like this, and yeah, come to YAE or yeah, organizations.
One way to educate about climate change is to watch a movie about climate change. For example, Happy, This Changes Everything, or Lorax. And one way to help with climate change is one benefit of YAE is that you can meet new friends around the world, and they can help. You can gather some other friends that you know want to make a difference in the world. Family, small actions can cause a big impact, and families can make differences in the world.